guys, my name is Itisha. Welcome to my channel, and today in this video we are going to discuss one of the React hooks that you have been running away from, and that is useEffect hook. I'm quite sure after watching this video you would no longer run away from it and would fearlessly use it in your projects. So without any further delay, let's get started. So useEffect hook is used to manage side effects in React functional component. Now what are side effects? So in literal sense, side effect is a consequence of some action. For example, the consequence of eating unhealthy food is we become obese. Similarly, in React, side effects are the additional or secondary tasks that you want React to perform as a consequence of something. Now that something might be, say, a change in some value or simply when the page gets rendered. So for performing those side effects, we require this useEffect hook. Let's try to understand it better with an example. So first, in order to use useEffect, we need to import it. So we will write import useEffect from React, and for defining this useEffect, inside it we need to pass in two parameters. One is a callback function and other is a dependency array. So let me quickly explain you what this dependency array is. So now we know that useEffect manages side effect, and side effect occurs as a consequence of some main action. But how will useEffect get to know that it needs to run that side effect? And that is made possible with the value that we store inside this dependency array. So useEffect keeps an eye on the values that we put inside this dependency array, and as soon as they change, useEffect gets to know that it needs to rerun the side effect inside it. Okay, let's see how this is happening. And for now, we are keeping it empty. That means this particular useEffect or this particular side effect is not dependent on anything. But as principles of React, even if we leave it empty, it runs just once after the component has rendered. So let me do a console log to see if the component has rendered. So I will write component has rendered. And after this component has rendered, and since we have this one as empty, if we do a console log here and write useEffect is running. So let me save this and see. So let me open up the console over here and do a refresh. So you can see that first we are getting the message that the component has rendered, and after that you are able to see that useEffect is running. And the main reason behind it is because we have left the dependency array as empty. And now we know that if we leave it empty, then this useEffect will run after the component has rendered. Okay, so far so good. You are 40% there to understand useEffect. Now, in order to understand the rest 60%, let's take another example, which is generally used in real life project, wherein the side effect would be dependent on something, say a state variable. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a state variable of user ID, and as and when that user ID changes, we want to fetch the data of that respective user from an API. Okay. So for using that API, we are going to use this website, that is JSON placeholder, and here we will get this particular API wherein we can get the user information of 10 users. Here we have an array. Inside it we have 10 respective users information like ID, name, username, email, etc. So first we'll create a state variable over here. So I will first import it, and then inside my app I'm going to create a state variable. Let's call it user ID, and I will also call this user ID function, and initially I want to keep its value as say 1. Also we'll be storing that data that we are fetching from the API somewhere. So for that we are going to create another variable. Let's call it user data and make this user data function, and initially I want to keep its value as null. Okay. Now inside this useEffect hook, let me comment this out. What we want is to fetch the data. For that, I'm going to create a function. Let's call it fetch data, and it's going to be an asynchronous function. Inside it, we are going to write a try catch so that we are able to catch any errors if there are any while fetching the data from the API. And in case of error, we want to console the error, that error fetching the data. Now inside this try statement, we are going to create a variable called as response, which will fetch the data from the API. So this API is simply this URL. So I'll paste it here. And you can see that if I suffix it with the user ID, that is 1, we get the details of the user that is there with the ID 1. And if I change it to 2, I'll get the user data of the second user. So here what I am going to do is I will define my user ID over here. Okay. Then after this, I will create another variable called as data, and I want to convert this response to JSON so that I can display it on my browser. Then I will set my user data as the data that I have received by fetching the API and converting it to JSON. Okay. After this, we will call this fetch data inside the useEffect only, and in this dependency array we want to keep my user ID, because we want that when this user ID changes, we want to fetch the data of that respective user. But we also need to do something to change this user ID. So for that, we'll be creating two buttons, one for incrementing the user ID and another one for decrementing the user ID. So first one I will call as user ID increment, and on click, what I want is my user ID should increase to 1. So I will set my user ID to user ID incremented by 1. And similarly, I can copy this again for creating a button for decrementing the user ID. So I'll call it decrement, and here I will just decrease it by 1. Also, you want to show some data of the user that you have fetched from the API. For that, first I need to check if user data exists, and if it exists, I will create a div inside which I am going to show the user information. So I'll create a h1 which will say user profile, and I will create two p tags, one for the name. And this name I can get from user data, as this is the state variable which is storing the data that we have fetched from the API, and the value is name, as we can see over here. And similarly, I'll create another p tag which will say email, and this we can get from user data.email. Okay, let's save this. And now go back to our console, and here if we do a refresh, I'm getting the name and the email of the user with the user ID as 1. And if I increment my user ID, so you can see that we are getting the user information with user ID 2, and if I decrement it, I'm getting back the user information with user ID 1. So you can see that as soon as we change our user ID, useEffect keeps an eye on it and then calls the side effect inside it. So that's the beauty of using a useEffect hook. So you can try to do this multiple times and you would see how this data is fetching again and again with the change in the user ID. Also, one thing to note in here is initially our value in the dependency array, that is user ID, did not change because it was 1 and we did not even click on any of these buttons. Then how come this was visible on the screen? This information was being fetched. This is because even if you put anything or nothing in your dependency array, it runs at least once when the component gets rendered. Even if we kept the user ID here and it did not change on the initial render, but as a principle of React, it runs at least once when the component has rendered. So that's why we were able to see the information in here. Okay, so by now I hope you have a clear understanding of what side effect is, how dependency array is making the useEffect to run the side effect inside it, and so on. So you're 90% there. There is just one last thing that you need to know about useEffect, and that is a cleanup function. So it is basically a optional function that you can write inside your useEffect hook. So how we need to write it is return, and inside it we can write it. So basically this cleanup function is used to clean up or perform some action after the component has been removed from the screen. Say when you change the screen, or when you close this page, or when a new effect is applied. Since we did not have any particular requirement of a cleanup function in this particular example, that's why we did not use it here, but I will show you with the help of a simple example. So let's say since we do not have any other page to go to, we will use this cleanup function after a new effect is being called, and we'll see how it is getting run. So inside it, I will log on the console that cleanup function is called. Okay, and I will remove this one and I will also make this one available. Okay, and do a refresh over here. So you can see that when the component is rendered, you can see that useEffect is running. So this is what we saw in the first example as well. So this is fine. Now what I said earlier is when the new effect is being called, just before that our cleanup function will be called. Let's see if it is happening or not. So if I am clicking on user ID increment, you can see that before the next effect ran, just before that our cleanup function is called from the previous effect that we did. So what it did is it tried to call this cleanup function just before our user ID incremented and this side effect ran twice. So the primary use of this cleanup function is to prevent memory leaks and maintain a clean state. So that's why we use this. So let's get an overview of the life cycle of this useEffect. So useEffect will run after the initial render. Also, it will run if there is any value in the dependency array, and as it changes, this useEffect will rerun. Then before each new effect or component being removed from the screen due to say change in the screen or you exit the page, then this cleanup function from the previous effect will run. So this is the complete life cycle of the useEffect hook. So that's all for this video. Today you learned a really important fundamental topic of React, that is useEffect hook. So what are you waiting for? Fearlessly use useEffect hook in your React project with a clear understanding of what you are doing. And if you want me to create more such videos on the rest of the hooks that are there in React, do let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more such videos in future. See you in the next one.